Outside, my knees shook so badly, I had to sit on the curb beside the flour barrel for nearly 5 minutes before I could drive. Do you know what betrayal does after the first blow? It keeps happening in smaller ways. A sentence here, a look there, a memory that suddenly changes shape in your mind. Every kindness you once treasured gets re-examined under a harsher light. By Wednesday, more pieces had surfaced. The produce supplier called me directly because Wesley had attempted to renegotiate terms using the family business name, but not the established account credentials. The insurance agent left me a voicemail asking why ownership changes had not been properly reported, and Mrs. Patel, the accountant who had done our quarterly filings for years, asked if I could stop by because there are some irregularities I would rather discuss in person. Irregularities. That word has ruined many people's day. I went at 4:30 that afternoon. Mrs. Patel was precise in every way. Precise shoes, precise hair, precise use of concern. She spread 3 folders on her desk and said, I need to ask whether you authorized a series of reimbursements categorized as management expenses. I read the entries and felt heat rise straight up the back of my neck. Gas cards, hotel stays, consulting lunches. Nearly $11,000 over 9 months. Those are Wesley's, I said. Mrs. Patel nodded. That was my assumption. How were they coded? She gave me a careful look. By your mother? I sat back. It is one thing to know your brother has used you. It is another thing entirely to realize your mother helped him do it line by line. I heard myself ask, did my father know? Mrs. Patel did not answer directly. Instead she said, your father signed where he was told. That was answer enough. I walked out into the parking lot at 5:22 p.m. with copies of the records under my arm and sat in my car while rain tapped softly against the windshield. I did not start the engine. I just stared ahead. This was no longer about inheritance, no longer about favoritism. It was a structure, a system. My steadiness had funded Wesley's instability for years, and they had all called it family. But what I didn't know was that things were about to get even worse. The deeper truth arrived on a Thursday evening at 6:11 p.m., wearing the smell of fryer oil and dishonesty. I had gone back to Belle's pantry only to retrieve my blue recipe tin and an old church cookbook that belonged to my grandmother. I chose that hour because I knew the dinner rush would be over and Wesley hated staying late. The front was dim. Chairs half up on tables. My father had already gone home. I could hear voices from the office in the back. Normally I would have announced myself. That night I didn't. I stood just beyond the hall near the old display rack where we kept local honey, and I heard my brother say, clear as a bell, we just need the appraisal high enough to cover the tax liens and truck note. After that, I can sell the lot behind the store and move them into assisted living somewhere cheaper. Silence. Then, Trina, what if your sister finds out? Wesley laughed. She already found out what matters. Let her sulk. Mom knows how to handle her. I felt as if the floor beneath me had dropped an inch. Asterisk move them into assisted living somewhere cheaper. Asterisk not because they needed care, not because it was safest. Because he wanted the land. My mother's voice came next, lower and tense. You promised me you wouldn't rush us. I said not immediately. Wesley snapped. But I can't keep juggling everything. And if you'd stopped babying Comatose, this would have been finished already. Babying me. The word was so absurd I nearly made a sound. Trina spoke again. What about the catering clients? She built those relationships. Wesley replied, then we take the list and hire somebody younger. I stood there with one hand against the wall because suddenly I needed the support. It is a terrible thing when overheard truth confirms your worst suspicion and adds one worse. This was never about honoring the family line. It was asset stripping dressed up as tradition. And my parents, at least my mother, and likely my father through silence, had offered me up to make it easier. I stepped into the hallway then. All 3 of them turned. My mother's face went white first, then hard. Wesley swore under his breath. I said very quietly, you were planning to put them somewhere cheaper. He recovered fast, the way liars do when they've rehearsed the shape of innocence. That's not what you heard. It is exactly what I heard. My mother straightened. You have no right to eavesdrop. The nerve of dishonest people is a marvel. No, I said. You lost the right to privacy when you started using my life as your funding source. Wesley shoved a file closed. You're twisting everything. I looked straight at my mother. Did you know he was planning to leverage the property, pay his debts, and move you out? Her lips parted, then pressed thin. We discussed options. Options? My voice cracked then, the first break in my control. Was I one of the options too? Keep me working until the paper's clear, then thank me with a time card? My mother said something I will never forget. She said, "You always were better at surviving than Wesley. We had to think about who needed the help. Need." There it was, the sacred family word that excuses every theft from the competent child. I stared at her. "So because I survive," I said slowly, "you feed him with my life. My father wasn't there to hear it, but something in me spoke to him too, to all the years of silence. To every birthday where Wesley's failures were treated like storms we all had to brace for, while my effort was treated like furniture." Wesley snapped, "You're acting like a victim, because for once everything's not about you." I laughed then, and it sounded strange even to me. "For once," I said. "Wesley, if this family held a parade every time you were centered, the whole town would need folding chairs." Trina looked away. Even she couldn't defend that. My mother tried a different tone, softer, almost pleading. "Comatose, honey, don't do this. We can work something out." That was the moment hurt became anger. Not rage, not wildness, cold anger, useful anger, because work something out was what people said when they wanted the injured party to provide one more bridge back to comfort. I looked at all three of them and said, "No, I don't think I will." Then I walked to the office, took my recipe tin, my grandmother's cookbook, my vendor folder, and the framed photograph of my younger self standing beside the store's first lunch counter. In the picture I am 20, 3 smiling, apron dusted with flour, believing hard work made you safe. I tucked it under my arm and left without another word. At 7:08 p.m., sitting in my parked car under a street lamp, I called Anita. She answered on the second ring. I said, "It's worse than we thought. Tell me." By the time I finished, she was already clicking keys on the other end. "Good," she said. I blinked. "Good. Good that you know. Good that they're careless. Good that people who believe they've already won often say far too much." The next morning at 9:10 a.m., I was back in her office with new notes, new copies, and one pounding question. What do I do now? Anita laid it out clearly. We would file notice of my financial claim on the property improvements and unreimbursed capital contributions. We would separate my sole business assets recipes, catering contracts, equipment purchased under my name, payroll accounts, food, service permits. We would notify vendors and clients that operations under my management were no longer authorized through the old structure. And if necessary, we would contest any attempt to use my documented work, product, or business identity as if it belonged to Wesley. I listened, then asked something that made her pause. "What about my parents?" She leaned back slightly. "What about them? I don't want them ruined." Anita's expression softened, but only a little. "Protecting yourself is not ruining them." That sentence took me a while to believe. Over the next week, I learned the harder truth hidden inside family betrayal. When you stop absorbing injustice, the people who benefited from your silence call you cruel. My mother left messages saying I was tearing the family apart. Wesley texted, ***, don't be stupid. You'll regret making enemies out of blood. ***, my father called once, late at night, and said in a tired voice, "Can't you just let the boy get established?" The boy. He was 54 years old. I did not answer that message. Instead, I opened my kitchen cabinets, looked at my copper mixing bowls, my labeled spice jars, my blue ceramic teapot, and I asked myself a question I should have asked years earlier. If they already decided I do not belong in what I built, why am I still acting like a guest in my own life? That is when I noticed something that changed everything. Across the street from the post office sat an empty florist shop. The lease sign had been up for 4 months. Big front window, 2 sinks in back, good morning light, and for the first time since the betrayal, I felt something other than pain. I felt possibility. The planning phase of my life did not begin with revenge. It began with a tape measure. The following Monday at 10:00 a.m., I stood inside that old florist shop with dust on my shoes and sunlight falling across the scuffed floorboards. The air smelled faintly of soil and old ribbon. In the back room, there was enough space for prep counters and a narrow commercial refrigerator. The front window faced Main Street directly, straight across from Belle's pantry. The realtor, a sweet-faced woman named Denise, kept apologizing for the condition. The previous tenant left in a hurry, she said. I looked around and said, so did I. She smiled awkwardly, not sure whether I was joking. I wasn't. By 10:47 a.m. I had signed a 12-month lease. At 11:12 a.m. I called Lucille. You bought it, she asked. Leased it. There was a beat of silence. Then she laughed, a full, delighted laugh I hadn't heard from my own mother in years. Well, she said, look at you, finally putting your backbone in business attire. The next 3 weeks were the quietest revolution of my life. While Wesley strutted around the pantry telling people he had big plans, I moved with purpose and almost no noise. I transferred my catering clients formally. I opened a new operating account. I contacted the county health office about permits. I hired Earl's grandson to repaint the walls, a soft cream. I brought in the blue teapot from my old front shelf and set it in the window beside a handwritten sign that read, Soups, Pies, Tea, and Catering by Comatose Bell ***. When I taped that sign up, my hands trembled, not from fear, from recognition. I had spent so many years being useful inside other people's plans that I had nearly forgotten what it felt like to make one of my own. Anita kept working the legal side while I built the practical one. She sent notices. She documented claims. She made it clear, in firm and polished language, that any attempt to use my proprietary materials, client relationships, or sole account assets without authorization would be met with action. Wesley, of course, ignored the seriousness at first. People like him often do. At 3:32 p.m. on a Wednesday, he came into my new shop without knocking. Paint cans in the corner, ladder by the wall, my apron tied over old jeans. He looked around slowly and gave a theatrical whistle. So this is your little revenge project. I kept labeling jars, no, this is my business. He shoved his hands in his pockets. You know, Mom cried all morning. I did not look at him. That must have been inconvenient for her. Don't do that. Do what? Act cold. It doesn't suit you. I turned then. Wesley, you took what I built, emptied money out of accounts I managed, and planned to profit off our parents while calling me dramatic. You do not get to critique my temperature. For a second he dropped the grin, then he tried a different tack. You really think people are going to choose this place over the pantry? That store has history. I smiled faintly. Yes, it does. He stepped closer. Just so we're clear. Anything from the old menu stays with the family business. I laughed. My recipes are in my handwriting, I said, on cards in my tin. You remember the tin, the one I took while you were busy calculating how quickly to warehouse our parents. His jaw tightened. That's not what happened. That's exactly what happened. He leaned in, voice low. You always make yourself the martyr. No, I said. You always need one. He left after that, but not before muttering, you'll come crawling back when this flops. Maybe in another season of my life, those words would have followed me home. This time they lit a fire. Every morning, I arrived at Blue Teapot Kitchen by 6:15. I measured shelf heights, tested soup batches, scrubbed second-hand tables, and trained 2 part-time helpers from church. Marlene, who could peel apples faster than grief, and Josie, who kept peppermint candies in every pocket. At night, I went home tired in the best way. Not drained, not used. Just honestly tired from building. Of course, the guilt still came. It arrived in flashes. Seeing my father's truck at the doctor's office without me in the passenger seat. hearing from Mrs. Delgado that my mother had been looking peaked. Standing in the grocery aisle one evening holding a bag of rice and wondering if I was abandoning people who had simply failed me in the way they knew best. That is the danger for women like me. We can find guilt in a clean kitchen. So I went to visit Reverend Sloane. Not because I needed permission, but because some wounds sound clearer when spoken aloud in a quiet room. He listened from behind his desk while I explained the whole thing. When I finished, he folded his hands over his Bible and said, "The commandment says honor your father and mother. It does not say become their unpaid sacrifice." I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. He continued, "You may still choose kindness, but kindness and surrender are not the same thing." I took that with me too. By the 4th week, Wesley had grown more arrogant. That's the thing about people who mistake patience for weakness. Once they think you are cornered, they stop hiding themselves. He started telling customers I was having a hard time adjusting. He described Blue Teapot Kitchen as a hobby shop. He boasted about a grand relaunch of Bell's Pantry under new leadership, complete with a bank, backed expansion and fresh branding. Fresh branding. Imagine saying that about your sister's life. Then came the moment of dramatic irony Lucille would later enjoy far too much. At 8:04 a.m. on a Friday, Wesley posted on social media, ***, big things coming for Bell's Pantry. New era starts next month. *** at 8:17 a.m., Anita filed the formal lien notice on my documented unreimbursed improvements and capital contributions. At 8:43 a.m., the bank acknowledged receipt. And at 9:02 a.m., the county permit office confirmed that the active food service certification tied to the prepared lunch program remained under my sole operating entity, not the property deed. Little did they know, I was already 3 steps ahead. If you want to know the last straw, I can tell you the exact date. It was a Tuesday, 11:36 a.m., cloudless sky. My mother called and said, "Come to the house. We need to settle this before it becomes a spectacle." I nearly laughed at the word asterisk before asterisk, since spectacle had been their chosen method from the beginning. Still, I went. Part of me still hoped there might be some late, blooming honesty in that house, some trembling apology, some human recognition. I should have known better. When I arrived, Wesley and Trina were already there at the dining table. My father sat in his usual chair, shoulders bent inward. A manila folder rested in front of my mother. No coffee offered, that told me everything. She pushed the folder toward me. "This release will resolve the confusion." I opened it. It was a waiver, a neat legal document poorly drafted, not by Anita or anyone competent, stating that I acknowledged Wesley as sole owner of Bell's Pantry, surrendered any informal claims, and agreed to provide transitional consulting for 60 days in the interest of family harmony. I looked up slowly. "You want me to sign away my rights and train him?" My mother lifted her chin. "You know the systems," Wesley added. "It's temporary." I laughed then, a short, sharp laugh that made Trina flinch. "You tried to erase me at a party, moved money behind my back, and now you want me to teach you how to wear my skin. Don't be crude," my mother snapped. I turned to my father. "Did you ask for this?" He looked miserable. "Your mommy thinks it'll calm things down. The tragedy of some men is not that they are monsters. It is that they make cowardice look like neutrality." I set the paper down carefully. "No." Wesley leaned back. "Think hard, sis. If you drag this out, nobody wins." I met his eyes. "That's where you're wrong." My mother's face hardened in that old familiar way, the one that had controlled birthdays, school photos, and every family silence for decades. "You have always been jealous," she said. For a moment, even the clock seemed to stop. I said very quietly, "Of what?" "Of the way your brother carries himself, of how naturally he fits into leadership, of how people respond to him." I looked at Wesley, then back at her. "Mother," I said, "the only thing I ever envied was how little he had to earn. That landed so deep nobody spoke." Then she said it. the sentence that burned away the last of my hesitation. A daughter should know when to step aside. There is something about hearing a lie so complete, so ancient, so polished with family tradition, that it does not wound you the same way. It reveals in that instant I stopped trying to be understood. I rose from the table. My mother said sharply, "Sit down." "No." Wesley smirked. Running out again, I picked up my purse. No, leaving by choice, it's a different posture. At the door, my father finally spoke with some force in his voice. Comatose. I turned. His eyes were wet, not enough to stop anything, but wet. He said, "You know we love you." I wish I could tell you that line healed something. It didn't. Love without fairness becomes sentiment. Love without protection becomes burden. So I answered him honestly. "I know you're used to me carrying the part of the family nobody else would." Then I left. At 1:15 p.m., Anita called. "The bank has set the closing meeting for Thursday at 2:00, she said. "Wesley is pushing for speed that helps us." "How?" "He thinks speed favors entitlement. In reality, speed favors whoever kept records." I stood in my unfinished shop with a paint roller in hand and listened as she outlined the final steps. Vendor notices would go out first thing Thursday. The bank would be informed of pending claims and disputed operating authority. A formal cease and desist would address use of my materials. The county inspector had already confirmed that food service under the existing lunch model could not legally continue without valid operating oversight. Everything was about to change, Anita said, and they have no idea it's coming. That night I sat alone at my kitchen table again, but this time not in despair. In preparation, I wrote out payroll for my 2 helpers. I reviewed my opening menu: chicken and wild rice soup, tomato basil, pimento cheese, buttermilk pie, lemon loaf, egg salad on soft wheat, and my peach cobbler. I ironed a cream blouse. I polished the blue teapot until it shone. Then, at 11:08 p.m., I did one more thing. I arranged private elder care consultations for my parents, not because I intended to rescue them, because I refused to become the villain in a story written by people who had already used me enough. If systems were going to deliver justice, I wanted conscience standing beside it. Thursday morning came bright and sharp. At 7:00 a.m., Blue Teapot Kitchen opened quietly for a soft launch. No balloons, no speech, just a handwritten sign, **open. By 7:20, there were 6 customers. By 8:00, there were 14. By 9:15, we had sold out of lemon loaf. At 10:30, Mrs. Delgado held my hand across the counter and whispered, "Honey, this place feels like you." I nearly cried into the register. Across the street, Bell's Pantry looked busy too, but restless, men in polos. A printer delivery, Wesley pacing. At 1:38 p.m., I locked my shop, told Marlene and Josie to keep serving tea, and walked to Anita's office for the closing showdown. I remember thinking as I crossed Main Street that my whole life had prepared me for that walk, not the betrayal. The steadiness, the discipline, the refusal to confuse noise with strength. 2 hours earlier, I had ladled soup. Now I was about to watch truth enter the room in a suit and sensible heels. Everything was about to change. The bank conference room was too cold, as those rooms often are, and smelled faintly of toner and old carpet. A rectangular table sat in the middle under fluorescent lights that made everybody look slightly dishonest. Wesley was already there when Anita and I arrived. He wore the same navy blazer from the anniversary party. I noticed that some people repeat clothes for comfort. Wesley repeated them for effect. My mother sat beside him with her handbag clasped in her lap like a shield. My father looked pale and tired. Trina was on Wesley's other side, flipping through her phone until she saw us and stiffened. The lone officer, a man named Brent Collier, stood when we entered. MS Bell, MS Flores. There was a slight formality to his tone now that had not been there in earlier weeks. Good, formality means paper has started speaking. Wesley forced a smile. Didn't know this was a family reunion. Anita set down her briefcase. It isn't. We sat. Brent cleared his throat. Before we proceed, there are newly filed matters affecting this transaction. My mother turned to Wesley. What matters? He didn't answer because for once, he truly didn't know. Anita slid copies across the table one by one. Not dramatically, just cleanly. This is notice of a mess. Bell's documented financial claim related to capital improvements, emergency repairs, tax payments, and unreimbursed operating contributions tied directly to the property and its commercial viability. Wesley frowned. That's nonsense. Anita didn't even look at him. This is vendor correspondence clarifying that key service relationships are contracted under MS, Bell's sole operating entity. This is notice concerning proprietary materials and client relationships. This is the county statement regarding food, service licensing, and non-transferability under the current ownership assumptions. Brent adjusted his glasses. The room changed. It really did. You could feel it. The atmosphere shifted from family theater to legal weather. Wesley looked at me as though seeing me clearly for the first time. You filed against your own family. I held his gaze. No, I documented what my family did. My mother's mouth opened, then closed. Brent spoke carefully. Given the encumbrance and unresolved operational questions, the bank cannot proceed with refinancing today. The silence after that sentence was almost musical. Wesley sat up straight. That's ridiculous. This is a simple ownership transition. Anita replied, It was never simple. It was simply hidden. Trina whispered, Oh my God. My mother turned to me then, not with sorrow, but with offended disbelief, as though my refusal to stay powerless were the real breach. You would do this to us, I answered calmly. You did it to yourselves when you decided my work was free and my future was transferable. Wesley slammed his palm on the table once, not violent, just desperate. This is sabotage. No, Anita said. Sabotage is moving money, misrepresenting control, and assuming the person who built the operation will keep feeding you while you cut her out. Brent shifted in his chair. He clearly did not enjoy family morality. But banking has a way of becoming moral when money gets confused. My father finally spoke. How much? He asked, voice thin. Anita turned to him respectfully. Based on current documentation, the claim is substantial enough that any sale, refinancing, or leveraged use of the property will require resolution. Wesley stared at the pages, flipping faster now. My blue folders, my receipts, my notes, my handwriting. Years of being underestimated were stacked in front of him in black ink. This is petty, he said, but his voice had lost its shine. I looked at him and felt something unexpected. Not triumph, clarity. He had never believed I would defend myself because the family story depended on me not doing so. My mother turned to Brent. Can't we just proceed and sort this out later? He shook his head, not with the current filing and contested operational authority. Then came the second blow. Anita slid one final letter across the table. This is formal notice that MS, Bell's sole proprietorship, is ceasing all support services, menu licensing, catering operations, and supplier authorizations associated with Bell's pantry effective. Immediately, Wesley stared at her. You can't shut down the lunch counter. I spoke before Anita could. I'm not shutting down your lunch counter. I'm declining to loan you my life anymore. He looked stunned. Truly stunned, as if that possibility had never existed. Trina said in a brittle voice, What about the clients booked for spring? I answered, The clients who booked with me will be served by me, at Blue Teapot Kitchen. My mother looked like I had slapped her, though I had done nothing except stop kneeling. Across the street, she whispered, Yes. Wesley gave a harsh laugh. You think opening some little tea shop means you've won. I folded my hands in my lap. No, I think building something honest means I no longer lose. That, more than anything, seemed to unsettle him. Because people like Wesley do not understand freedom unless it comes as conquest, they cannot imagine peace as victory. Brent stood. signaling the meeting was effectively over. I'm sorry. We'll need documented resolution before revisiting any financing. As chairs scraped and papers gathered, my mother suddenly reached for my wrist. Her hand was cold. Please, she said, and for one brief aching moment, she sounded like my mother again. Don't do this. We can still fix it. I looked down at her hand. All those years, I had longed for her to hold on to me. Funny how timing changes meaning. I gently removed her fingers. No, I said softly, you can still face it. Then Anita and I walked out. If the story ended there, it would still be enough. But life, especially small, town life, likes a second act to the reckoning. At 3:40 p.m., a supplier truck turned away from Bell's pantry because the account authorization had been suspended pending updated paperwork. At 4:15 p.m., 2 catering clients called Wesley demanding clarification after receiving my formal notice and new business information. At 4:50 p.m., the county inspector stopped by to review operating compliance questions related